Good morning to all my friends and family, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Jim's 5am Club. It's an early morning, it's an early Monday morning, and I'm kicking off the week with yet another book summary, as we normally do. And I've spent a week at home in COVID isolation. I too, like many of us, caught COVID as well over the past week. Had mild conditions, wasn't much of an issue, but I did need to isolate from work and spent the week at home. And believe it or not, my long-suffering wife Paula, even though we were together as husband and wife for the full week, didn't catch COVID. And she's the last one in the family who has gotten through up until now with just her vaccinations. So there you go. The other good news is that the Harbour Bridge, the magnificent Sydney Harbour Bridge, celebrated its 90th anniversary yesterday. 90 years old. What an institution, what an awesome landmark we have here in Sydney, the Harbour Bridge, the Opera House, Sydney Harbour. Such a beautiful, beautiful city, which I guess is probably timely to talk about the next book summary that I have to talk about. And the book is entitled How the Mighty Fall, and it's by an author named Jim Collins. So it's a book that examines the 5 stages of decline, basically, or more so, with regard to corporate Australia, to large business institutions, to help identify the early signs of challenge, the early problems that a business may experience, so that A, you're aware of the steps, the stages, and B, to be in a position to try and manage it the best way you can, to minimise the fallout, minimise the pain, the suffering, and the challenges. In my career, I've been very fortunate. I've been very, very fortunate indeed to have worked for 3 organisations that have been able to grow and establish beyond the 100-year mark. Back in, I think, 1984 or 1985, when I was working for NCR, the NCR Corporation, National Cash Register Corporation, they celebrated their 100th anniversary. And I remember back then receiving a personalised card from the Australian CEO, Warren Castray, for my birthday, as did everybody else in the organisation, because it was a magnificent sort of achievement to be able to boast that you've been in business, in high-tech business, and have been able to survive over 100 years. Since then, I've also worked for IBM, and IBM also achieved the 100-year mark. I'd left IBM by then, but IBM is another organisation where the founder, the founder of IBM, Thomas Watson, was an employee of the CEO of NCR, of Patterson, George Patterson. I think it was George Patterson. It was certainly Patterson, but I forget what the first name was. And I've also worked in an organisation, a top-tier law firm called Allens, which this year celebrates its 200th anniversary. And on Saturday, I'm going to a school function. I went to Newington College as a student, and Newington celebrates its 177th anniversary. So I've been very fortunate to have been able to work in leading top-tier organisations that have been able to survive the test of time. And you often wonder and ask yourself, what is it about these organisations that enable them to not only survive but also to thrive the thrust of competition, the thrust of time, and to see how we can use that in our individual lives. I remember working with a manager years ago, Theo Tepepis, and he always used to say that the good times never last forever, and it's important, it's critical to be able to make the most of those good times as and when you have them available to you. And this book here, this author from Jim Collins, as we said, examines the 5 stages of decline to help us understand it, appreciate it better, and to make the most of it when we can. Just bear with me, my camera's playing up a bit. I'll just leave it there for now. Seems to be zooming in and zooming out, which is a little bit annoying. So the 5 stages, let's go through each of those stages and see what we can learn and how we can understand it a little bit better. So stage 1 is described as the hubris, born of success. And the author says here that sometimes being successful, you get a little bit full of yourself to a certain extent, and that fullness leads to one dropping their guard and being unhealthy in your processes, in your methodology, in your philosophies, because there's a special tension, according to the author here. There's a tension between changing and not changing. So each of us in our lives need to decide whether or not we change or we stay the same. And at different times of our lives, it makes sense to change, and at other times it makes sense to stay the same. I remember reading in a book years ago, the book was entitled The Millionaire Next Door, where the author says that you may have a generation who are able to be very, very successful and build a significant amount of wealth and opportunity. But what got that first generation to where they are is very, very difficult to replicate. And the second generation, unlike the first generation, instead of being the ones who build, are the ones who get to enjoy the fruits of their parents' labour. And then the children of that generation are the ones who have been 2 generations removed from the essence and the skills and the energy that helped build the wealth in the first place. And they're the ones who end up destroying all the value that their grandparents were able to create. So being able to maintain the momentum, the yeast, the formula that got the first generation to where they are is difficult throughout the ages, because people lose focus, lose energy, get lazy, look for shortcuts, and there's a whole number of things that happen to a brand that end up destroying it rather than making it stronger. So those principles, those first principles, the drive, the magic formula, the essence of success are hard to capture and even harder to pass on And as parents, you will learn very, very quickly that the last person that your children want to look forward to or want to look up to in order to gain advice and to learn about life are their parents. You know, they're more inclined to look for guidance from celebrity, from television, from a sporting star, or from those around them. And one of the challenges that we all face as parents is that there are a lot of products of broken families out there. People who have been brought up with families who may not be the necessary role models that children need in order to have the right building blocks. So regardless of how much experience you have as a parent, regardless of how much wisdom you've been able to accumulate through your family chain and through your culture, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to pass that on in a way which is not confronting, which is not challenging to your children, because your children and your grandchildren don't see you for the person who you may see yourself as. They may not see you as being a success, as a person who's been able to maintain a relationship for a lifetime. So I guess one of the challenges that we all face, and everyone faces in a business environment, in a religious environment, in a corporate environment, in a school environment, is being able to pass down and hand over the reins and the formula and all the ingredients for success to future generations. The author here talks about the importance of understanding that there's no need to change just for the sake of change, and just changing and, you know, doing things differently is also a recipe for success. You know, you see it amongst religious institutions that they change to appease the people within the congregation, only to lose the essence of what they're all about. They lose their identity. Because, as my spiritual father tells me all the time, the church didn't come here to be changed by people. The church came here and it's an institution whose purpose is to change people, to change people's nature, to help people grow, develop and improve, and not to be a tool of change within itself, just to appease, just to please, just to show that they are progressing, because progress isn't necessarily achieved through change in institutions who are here, as we said before, to help people change, improve and better themselves. So I remember many, many years ago when I was working at IBM, I used to hate the word change, because I always used to ask myself, why are we needing to change? The better word, the word which is most appropriate, most powerful, and most empowering, I guess, once again, I need to say that again, is the word improvement. You know, the only time we need to change is when we need to improve ourselves, when we need to better ourselves, when we need to stretch ourselves, not that we need to change just to tick the box to say that, oh, you know, we're constantly changing, we're constantly different. How wonderful are we? So the author here encourages us to be lifelong students, lifelong learners, and to look to apply our knowledge to change for the sake of improvement, but not to change for the sake of just change alone. Because as we're saying, we may end up changing and morphing time and time again, and getting to the point where we no longer recognize who we are, because we look in the mirror and the person in the mirror has changed so dramatically that they are different from the person who we want to see in the mirror, and the person who we love and cherish so much. So the author then goes on to talk about another aspect, another phase of change, of decline, and that's the undisciplined pursuit of more. Once again, I recall going to a seminar years ago run by Paul Clitheroe, the financial advisor. It was a superannuation type seminar run by the St George Bank, and I went with my friend Bill Carragunis, and he posed a very, very important and wonderful question to the audience. And he asked everybody, there is going to be a time where you're going to have to retire, where you need to retire because you're getting old, and for a number of other reasons. And he said that some people would just never retire. They'll just keep on working and just continuing to try and build and achieve and create. But he said there is a problem with that. And what we all need to do in our lives is to be very, very clear on one question. How much is enough? How much is enough for you and your family? And that answer will differ amongst people, amongst individuals, amongst families, amongst communities. Some people will be happy. Some people will say that the pension is enough. Others will need $1 million or $5 million. Others 100 million. Others 1 billion. Some people get caught so much in the building, the growing, the accumulating phase of their life. They get intoxicated by it until they get to the point where they no longer understand, no longer realize, no longer appreciate why they're doing it, and just keep on doing what they're doing to satisfy themselves, satisfy their greed, I guess is one way of putting it, not really understanding that life is more than just accumulating. More is all about living, sharing, contributing, and self-actualizing. And you need to hand over, you need to pass things on and move on, else you just become a machine, a money-making machine, a pleasure-seeking machine, which has no purpose and has no outcome, no positive, productive outcome. So the author here is saying that we just can't have organisations being undisciplined in their pursuit of more, just trying to build and grow and become bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because the objective is to serve. And I've been privy to a number of mergers throughout my working career, and you learn quite quickly that mergers simply don't work, just like a lot of marriages simply don't work, because you're bringing together desperate parties who are quite different in their goals, quite different in their outcomes, quite different in their backgrounds, and you're trying to make them fit together. But unfortunately, it ends up being like a square peg in a round hole, and never getting off the ground, never being able to produce collaboration and cooperation, and to be able to work together for a bigger and better and more beautiful outcome. Because sometimes you bring two things together that don't have the chemistry to fit together, and some fail to innovate, some become complacent in their marriage or in their union, they become lazy. And at the other end, we need to be careful not to push for insatiable growth, because there are times and place for growth. There are times and place to enjoy the roses, and not always do you get talent to be able to, top talent to be able to work together. There are economic cycles that you need to be aware of. Timing is critical, and the coordination and the politics within organisations, within families, can get quite toxic. So what we're saying is that it's good to grow when the time is right, but it's not always the right time. And so we need to be careful, we need to be cautious, and we need to understand that organisations, families, institutions can last many, many years. So the important thing for the people who are working in these institutions and organisations is to try and hand them over to the next generation in a better way than what they were received. So the third phase that the author talks about, and I'll start heading off to the train, is that we need to be aware of the risks, and not to deny the risks or to deny the perils that could be present to an organisation. We need to be able to try and read the writing on the wall. Don't blame others. Don't externalise risk or discount the negatives. And try and not take big bets, because a big bet can pay off, but a big bet can also destroy an organisation and destroy an institution. It's better, just like the way the church works. I know that the Greek Orthodox Church, the hierarchy works on consensus, agreement, rather than having a dictator or somebody at the top calling the shots. It's a consensus amongst the leadership which gets decisions made and things done. The other thing that the author talks about here, another phase of decline, is where people are grasping for salvation. The author here reminds us that there are no silver bullets when things are in decline. When a relationship is in decline, there's no silver bullet. You basically need to do the hard yards. You basically need to go back to basics, and you need to be disciplined and work hard to try and sort things out, because we need to stem the flow, stem the negativity, and try and slowly but surely turn the ship around, and to rebuild momentum, which is really difficult. I know that Warren Buffett, the great investor, always says that it's really, really difficult, if not impossible, to turn around a big organisation that is having problems and is in decline. So to be realistic with our views and our expectations, and things are never as easy as what you think they may be. Turning around an organisation, turning around a marriage which is on the rocks, sorting out children who are problematic. All of these things are not easy and take patience and take an investment in time and love, and needs to be done. But most people don't have the effort or the patience and passion to follow it through, I guess, is the key message. So just let me look at my notes here. I've run out of light. So where are we up to here? So it's difficult to die a pain and slowful death. People are always clutching at straws to try and survive. And what else I've learnt over time is when an organisation is having problems, when a family is having problems, people go missing in action. People lose interest. They want to abandon the ship. They clock out. And what else happens is that businesses have a lurch. They tend to lurch in their decision making. They make knee-jerk reactions, which is also really, really dangerous. And what the author here says is when times are tough, what you need is calmness. You need decisiveness. You need to work in a constructive, deliberate way without overreacting, because the overreaction will cause panic, will cause people to abandon ship, as I said before, and to clock out. So it's important to maintain a slower, deliberate pace, but to be, deliberate in that activity. So the last point here is that the author talks about is capitulation. All businesses need cash to survive. Now, you can be profitable, you can be successful in many, many ways, but if you haven't got the cash flow to pay your bills, if you haven't got those emergency funds to keep you operating, I'm a share trader and I do have margin accounts, and on occasion I get margin called and I run out of cash, I run out of oxygen, and I need to sell stock, even at a loss, even at a tremendous loss. I need to get out of certain positions in order to survive. But that's the price that you need to pay. In order to stay alive in the game. And the same thing happens in business, the same thing happens in relationships. You need to have oxygen to maintain the relationship and to keep things alive, to keep the business alive. And in a business, cash is king, cash flow is paramount. And we all need sound management practices coupled with discipline. And the author here says that you need the cash, but you also need the ability to make early decisions and to stick to those decisions, to be a person who can clearly see the writing on the wall. And as we said, not to be a negative Nancy, but not to be also a Pollyanna, where you discount the negativity and you just sweep it under the carpet, like Albanese is doing with the Three Mean Girls. I'll finish up now, and I'll just say that when I was working at IBM back in the heady 80s, the mid 80s, towards the end, in the early 90s, IBM hit a wall because its competitors caught up with it, and the competitors were making huge inroads. And Brian Finn brought together his management team for a weekend retreat at Pennant Hills, and the subject for that meeting is, how do we solve the problem that we have? Where he called upon all of his executives to present what IBM was going to do to deal with the problem at hand. So I guess it's important to understand that you don't turn up to that meeting and say that we don't have a problem at all and everything's rosy. He was very, very clever in terms of saying, well, we've got a problem. What's the problem that you see in your part of the business, and what do we need to do to innovate and to solve it? Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Monday morning, It's my first day back at work after a week off, recuperating from my bout of COVID-19. I guess we all get a chance to experience it. Some will experience it twice or three times. But thank God I'm vaccinated and boosted, and my symptoms weren't problematic, and I was able to get through it without too much of a problem at all. Anyway, take care everybody, and we'll chat again, and we'll go through more book summaries. I've got about a dozen that I've pre-prepared and I'm ready to go. So over the next week we'll clock up a few more and see where it leads us, because it's all about living, learning and passing it on. And I'm learning a lot, and I'm learning even more by passing it on through this free service known as Jim's 5am Club. If you can, subscribe to my YouTube channel or pass the message on, because I'm sure there are people out there who could benefit from the messages, the empowering messages that we're able to share and capture on this channel. Take care, bye for now, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Yasas. And happy birthday, Harbour Bridge.